verse 8, and I want to pick up, excuse me, I want to pick up there because some of it ties together in verses 9, 10, and 11, though we'll spend most of our time in verses 9, 10, and 11. But Jude, verse 8, or Jude chapter 1, verse 8, because there's only one chapter, he comes along and he says, likewise, that is because you remember the whole point of it, of the book, is these certain men who crept in unawares, in verse 4, who were written of long ago, before of old ordained to this condemnation, and he's talking about these men. And he's already given a few examples of people who crept in unaware, so to speak. And then he is going to give some new examples of the kind of, I guess you would say, apostasy that these men have. So he says, likewise, also, these filthy dreamers. You may remember last week we were talking about that. And this is one of the places where the King James translators got a little carried away with themselves and put in the word filthy. I am glad they italicized it so that we know that they are there, and probably they're even in a sense right, but the scripture just says these dreamers. So they're not living in reality, I think is the point, and they're denying reality. Does anyone here know anyone, by the way, who denies reality? Or have any of you ever tried to deny reality? That I think that's what he's saying, more so than their filthiness. Certainly they had a filthiness, especially doctrinally, but these dreamers defile the flesh, despise dominion, and speak evil of dignitaries. Defile the flesh is a sexual term there, ekporneo actually, and then despise dominion. I again mentioned this last week, but I want to pick up on it again because it ties in just a moment. What is it to despise dominion? Well, you may remember that the word is actually it's the same word we get Lord, and so you could really very well define it. They despise lordship, not necessarily, though. I guess you could say this as well. The lordship of Jesus Christ, because earlier it says they deny Jesus Christ. But it's any kind of lordship. Now, we don't speak in the United States, of course, of lords and ladies and all that, and the obedience that might be owed to someone who has the title of Lord. But here, the idea in despising lordship is they just despise any kind of leadership. You do too every now and then, don't you? When leadership doesn't go our way, we despise it. But most of us are mature enough to say, okay, in the places I'm in charge, I'll be in charge, and in the places I'm not in charge, I'll sit and say, yes, sir, yes, ma'am, whatever it is, even though I may have done it differently if it was me. And these are just people who really are never going to go along with leadership. They just despise dominion. And those people, by the way, they're not good to have anywhere, are they? Do you want them in the pansy club? No. Do you want them in the church? No. Do you want them in the government? No. Do you want, anywhere you go, despising dominion is a bad thing. I think that it's very important, just almost a worldview issue, to realize and recognize that God has established certain domains, if you will, of leadership, and a teenager who despises dominion we call him rebellious, right? There's leadership within the home. There's leadership within the school or the government, and at work, on and on. So it's an important thing. And so here's men who despise dominion, and he says in verse 8, speak evil of dignities. This is, what did I put on the outline? Blaspheme glories is the way it literally is. And the word blaspheme is going to come up here several times, though not so much in English. But they blaspheme glories. As I mentioned last week, it can be any kind of glories. Anything glorious, they blaspheme it. They are against anything glorious. Now, some of the translations have made it blaspheme dignitaries, and that's a little different than dignities, isn't it? We've already said they despise dominion. Now they blaspheme dignities. Some have made this they blaspheme angelic beings. And I think they just jumped ahead on verse 9 too quick. So really all it is here is they blaspheme dignities. Here it is approaching Thanksgiving, and those last two especially, despise dominion and speak evil of dignities. If you want to live a grateful life, which is what I'm going to preach on in a little bit, just learn to live within authority and learn to enjoy things that are glorious. And those two things help so much, don't they, to just develop the attitude of gratitude. Well, now we come to an interesting word in verse 9. It says, "Yet Michael the archangel," he's the contrast to these certain men of verse 4. "Michael the archangel, when contending with the devil, he disputed about the body of Moses, durst not bring against him a railing accusation, but said, The Lord rebuke thee." Now, we learn actually some things from this verse that we wouldn't know we wouldn't know had it not been for the book of Jude. And every now and then when I see something like one of these liberal scholars maybe who says the book of Jude doesn't belong in the Bible or whatever book it is, one of the things I always like to do is look for something that we wouldn't know outside of that book. And here's one of the things that we wouldn't know. And that is, first of all, that Michael is the archangel. This is the only place in the Bible that it tells us that Michael is the archangel. The archangel is mentioned another time, and that is at the time of the second coming when it says, not the second coming, the rapture, excuse me, and it says, the Lord will descend with a shout, with the voice of the archangel. That's right. And yet in that passage in 1 Thessalonians, it doesn't tell us his name. All it does is say the voice of the archangel. Now, there's speaking of certain men who crept in unawares or contending for the faith, there is a group out there you've heard of course, called Jehovah's Witnesses. And the Jehovah's Witnesses they fail by not being dispensationalists, for one, and so they believe the kingdom has been established, and that's why they meet down at the Kingdom Hall, and for them the Kingdom Hall is a little outpost of the kingdom, and on we could go there, but they also deny the Trinity. That is, they do not believe that Jesus Christ is the eternal Son of God. What they say is that Jesus is the brother of Lucifer. And being the brother of Lucifer, there was Lucifer, the angel of light, and his brother, the archangel Michael. So they would say that Jesus and Michael are the same folk. When they come to the door, which they don't tend to do now that I live here, but when I used to live in a neighborhood and they would come to the door, that's what I would talk to them about. I said, now, wait a minute. You believe that Jesus is Michael the Archangel, right? And they say, yes, we believe that he's Michael the Archangel. And I then would say, I think that is I usually would put it pretty strong, a damnable mistake. That is one that will send you to hell. Because the angel Michael doesn't save. He's the archangel, and we don't want to blaspheme dignities and take away any of his glory, but we also don't want to give him glory that's not his due. So nonetheless, the Jehovah's Witnesses here put these together, and they say, well, Jesus is coming with the voice of the archangel, and so they say, well, he must be the archangel. That's not really what that says, but that's what they make it say. And then they tie this together to say it's Michael. So we know he's the archangel. By the way, that Greek word is arche-angelos. So you can see how we get archangel. Arche is the word for chief or first or primary. And angelos, of course, is an angel or a messenger. So Michael here is the archangel. We know this. I put on your outline a little list of everything we know about Michael. And I've got, 6 little bullet points there. One of the reasons I put this is because there is a lot of a growing movement for, shall we say, angel worship, at least angel fascination. And if you just go home and Google Michael the Archangel, you'll find out all sorts of things about him that's on the internet, so it must be true, right? and all these things that are out there about Michael the archangel. There's a huge movement of things like how to pray to Michael, and what Michael the archangel can do for you, and people having little pendants of Michael the archangel. You've probably seen them before, although you might not have known it was Michael. But an angel often has got his wings up and a sword in his hand often, and that comes from a book of Daniel. And he's a very mighty angel, a very strong angel, a very masculine angel in all the artwork that is done. And sometimes you see him in artwork. There's some very famous artwork, actually, and you see him slaying the devil. Sometimes it's a dragon because of the references in the book of Revelation to the devil as the dragon. But he typically will have, his foot on the devil's head and his sword lifted up. And if there's a number of these famous pictures out there that I'm sure if I put one up, you'd say, oh yeah, I've seen that before, because it is quite popular. Now, we get that particular issue there of Michael and the sword and whatnot from the book of Revelation, chapter 12, verse 7, where he's the victor in the battle with Satan that takes place in heaven at the end. In Daniel, he's mentioned 2 or 3 times, and he is, in Daniel chapter 12, verse 1, the great prince which standeth for the children of thy people. And he is the protector of Israel, which is why, if you don't take words literally, then you transfer being the protector of Israel to being the protector of the church, and then you transfer that, since you're a part of the church, to being my protector. And so, very often in some forms of Catholic theology and some forms of just odd angelology, people will pray to Michael for protection. Sometimes they actually call him Saint Michael. That's a little different kind of sainthood, since Michael was never really a person outside of an angel. But again, when you come down to it, there's the 6 things on the outline that we know about Michael. Outside of that, the Bible doesn't really tell us anything about Michael. So he's the archangel. He shouts at the rapture. He's the central figure in that war in heaven. He is called one of the chief princes in Daniel chapter 10, verse 13. He expresses some information about the last days, and that would make sense, since he is the protector of Israel in Daniel chapter 12, verse 1. And then what we learn about him here is that he would not bring he fought over the body of Moses and would not bring a railing accusation against him. Now, a couple of things we learn here. In addition, he's the archangel, or the Markangel. He is the archangel, and he contended with the body. He contended with the devil when he disputed about the body of Moses. Now, I kind of like the word dispute here. He disputed about the body of Moses. The word is dialegomai. And dia is, of course, we get like diameter. It's the word that means through, going through something. So when I see dia or even di in English, I know, okay, this is from the Greek prefix dia. And the best way to interpret it typically is just to say it means thoroughly. That is, it goes all the way through the diameter, thoroughly. So, for example, if I am diametrically opposed to something, what am I? Every bit of metric, every measurement you can get, thoroughly all the way through, I am opposed to that. So, dia is this thoroughly word. Well, dialegomai, you may know, of course, the Greek word for word is logos. That's right. And so logos is word. Legos is to speak a word. Dialegomai means, I'll put it this way. He thoroughly gave him a tongue lashing. He gave him every word there was, and had a thorough conversation with him in disputing about the body of Moses. Now, I use the word tongue lashing here And in just a moment, we're going to see yet he would not give him a railing accusation. We'll talk about what that means. But let's talk about this dispute, and it's a verbal dispute that's going, a dialegomai. They're having this verbal dispute over the body of Moses, contending over the body of Moses. Now, I don't know about you, but if you ask any questions at all, you would have to say, what in the world are they fighting over a dead body for, right? And you remember from the book of Deuteronomy that God buried the body of Moses in an unknown location. It says in Beth Peor. That's all we know. So here's this body of Moses buried in an unknown location. Well, why didn't they have a proper burial, so to speak? Why didn't they put up a cross and say rest in peace and make this like would be appropriate for a Jewish leader like Moses? We could speculate, probably is the best we can do. One is we could speculate and say, well, God knew that if they had the body of Moses, they would venerate the body, they would begin to worship Moses. And that is possibly true. We see that still today, don't we? If somebody could come up, with Moses' wisdom tooth, then all the world would flock to see it. So maybe that is one of the reasons, but with that, I think there are others. In fact, you can go to Jerusalem and see the tomb of David. I don't know if his bones are actually in there or not, but there are other very famous people as well in the Bible that God didn't hide their bodies. So you'd have to say, why Moses and not Abraham or Joshua or whatever? I happen to think that the devil had interest in this body because there is a future role, very specific role for this body that doesn't work out well for him. And that role is, I think, that Moses is in the running for one of the two witnesses in the book of Revelation. I say in the running because all we know is there are two witnesses, but I would make a list of three people that it would work, and that would be Moses, Enoch, and Elijah. Enoch and Elijah did not die, you remember. Moses did, but his body was contended over. Moses and Elijah were representative of the law and the prophets. Moses and Elijah were there at the Mount of Transfiguration, which very much has to do with the coming kingdom. So I think, personally, that the devil knew that God was going to resurrect the body of Moses and use Moses again in the future as one of the two witnesses. And the two witnesses were going to give such strong proclamation to the Jewish people, an accusation against Satan, that was going to be a part of Satan's undoing. And so Satan is just doing some long-range planning here and saying, if I can get this body for myself so that it cannot be resurrected, then it's one more piece in the electoral puzzle on how to get elected, as king of the world, which is what Satan, of course, is trying to do. So that's really just speculation. The only thing I can say for sure is that Michael and the devil disputed about the body of Moses. And during that dispute, even though he thoroughly talked this thing out, it says, Michael durst not bring against him a railing accusation. A railing accusation would be what? Well, the literal translation would be a blasphemous charge. A blasphemous charge. That's kind of interesting because you think, well, how can you speak blasphemy against the devil? But blasphemy is just those things, I think in the simplest form, those things that are not true, right? And so even at this point, and our context is people who, what's the exact term? Despise dominion. And Michael is perhaps in some way recognizing that there is a dominion that Satan has, and he earned that dominion, if you will. He earned it by tricking Adam and Eve in the garden. And God, in a sense, allowed him to take that dominion unto himself. And so there's a degree in which even Michael the archangel is not going to go any further against his former companion, who would be Lucifer. And yet, what he did say is, "The Lord rebuke thee." Now, I think what that is just to say Michael the archangel understood authority, and he understood, I can go this far and no further, and I've got to give this up unto the Lord. It's in his hands from this point on. And this is where a lot of people begin talking about demonology and how to exorcise demons, for example. And the typical evangelical response is just come right here. The Lord rebuke thee. I won't get into all the demonology. It would be an interesting subject for another day. But I think if any of that is valid, that's really as far as we can go, is to say, the Lord rebuke thee. That's in the spirit world. That's the Lord's dominion. It's not my dominion, and I don't have control over this. And Michael, the archangel, understood his place. I think the point is, if Michael, the archangel, understood his place, then maybe these certain men should understand their place and not go outside of their own domain, as he talked about in verse 6. Now, verse 10, but these, that's these same guys in verse 4, these certain men, these speak evil of those things which they know not, but what they know naturally as brute beasts, in these things they corrupt themselves. These guys, they speak evil. In verse 8, you have the same thing. They speak evil of dignities. Now they speak evil of things which they know not. The word speak evil is literally the Greek word blaspheme. And they come and they speak evil of things that they know not. Now, I have no doubt that when these men came to blaspheme the thing that they didn't know about. I wish Jude would have written a longer book, would have made this a longer series, but I wish he would have said, told us what things they're speaking evil of, what things are they blaspheming that they don't know. So since he didn't say, I'll just make stuff up, okay? What I think is that whatever they're speaking evil of, they probably knew a little bit about, wouldn't you think? We wouldn't blaspheme the second in charge of the Republic of China, would we? Why not? There's not a person here who even knows who that person is, or if there is such a thing as a second in charge of China, So how in the world could we blaspheme? But if we know a little bit about him, like let's say the president of Russia, Putin, we know a little bit about him, right? And so it would be easy to blaspheme someone that we don't really know, I think the point here is do your homework before you throw something or someone under the bus. And here are some guys that are speaking evil of things which they know not. Now, because the topic here is contending for the faith, my hunch is there's some theological issue which they don't really know anything about, but they're not willing to accept it. And so they just speak evil of it. I have seen this, I think, 14,269 times in my 25 years of ministry. I've been keeping a tally. As people come along with some accusation against a theological position, and yet they really don't know anything about that theological position. And so what they begin doing is caricaturize. Is that the word? That's a cartoonish kind of figure, isn't it? They attack the characterization rather than the real thing. I think that that is something that we also easily want to get into. Of course, the one I know best is I'm a dispensationalist, of course, and if you Google dispensationalism, you will find out that we are all terrible heretics. It is pretty easy on a quick Google search to find these attacks. In fact, I watched a video someone asked me to watch this week, and it's some pretty famous scholars, like covenant theology scholars like R.C. Sproul, and they had this video of why they're against dispensationalism. And so here these scholars were sitting in a room and they were talking about dispensational positions that they're against. The problem is I was watching that, I'm thinking, I know as much about dispensationalism as anybody, and I don't know a dispensationalist who holds that, or believes that, or teaches that. And if that's what they held, I would be against it too. So they think they're attacking dispensationalism, but what they are doing is attacking a characterization of dispensationalism. So you could say, in a sense, they are blaspheming dispensationalism, speaking evil of something they don't know anything of. And it's in those conversations, I would love to sit and say, well, no, wait a minute, this, that, and that. I'll give you a very quick, simple example. There are some who say something like, there's not a single verse in the Bible that teaches a pre-tribulation rapture. In fact, there's a guy down in Houston that's offering, I think it's $10,000 for anyone who can present to him a single verse in the Bible that shows a pre-trib rapture. The truth is, all that's very dishonest. Because I believe in a pre-trib rapture, and I will tell you, there's not a single verse in the Bible that supports a pre-trib rapture. Now, I said that all very carefully, just like they did. And the key word is single verse. Can you get the pre-trib rapture out of a single verse? And the answer is no. You have to put a number of things together. You have to connect some dots to get there. Now, if you want to argue about the whole dot connection and bring out the whole argument, then let's do it. But to boil it down to, there's not a single verse that teaches that, is really just blaspheming it. It's a dishonest approach. And so somewhere here, these guys, in whatever church this is, they are blaspheming, speaking evil of some kind of a doctrine here, and yet they're not really even attacking the real thing, right? And I know that some of you have been attacked for this as well, whether it's family or work or school or whatever. Somebody attacked you for a position you didn't even have, right? And you get out here and see this. I saw a few political comments online this week. Surprising, isn't it? And one that I think of, someone had made this all of a sudden this huge accusation that the world was racist and bigoted and wanted all foreigners to get back to their country. And few people asked questions, where'd you get this? Someone supposedly had said something about it. And so she pointed to, here's where I got it from. And I went back and read it, as a number of other people did in this blog post that was done. Went back and read it and had to say, she didn't say that at all. That was not the position. And so, you had one person blaspheming the other, speaking evil of the other for something they never said, something that was not their position at all. In fact, I would say you would even have a hard time finding a person who holds the position. But this is what we like to do. I think in logic, isn't it called a straw man argument? You create this scarecrow that's not real, and then everybody attack him, and you put a name tag on him. Here's Mr. Bigotry, or here's Mr. Dispensational, or here's Mr. Whatever it is, and you attack that rather than the real thing, because the real thing has more substance to it, or the real thing might fight back. The real thing might have teeth. Whatever it is. So. Here, he again. These men speak evil of things which they know not. I should move on past this point, but I don't mind you or me, because I do the same thing, having an opinion about something that we're not terribly aware of. I think we ought to just be honest and say, my opinion of that is not very positive or whatever it is, even though I'm not an expert. Put a little disclaimer there somewhere. Maybe if I looked at the facts, you could convince me. But at this point, I just something smells like a skunk. That's okay to say, because you're saying, I don't, there's a rat here somewhere. I don't know what it is, but that's all fine. But you don't want to come to the point of speaking evil about those things which you know not. It says, but what they know naturally as brute beasts, in these things they corrupt themselves. What they know naturally, that is a Greek word that you'll understand. The word is physikos. The physical things they know, the things that are, you might say, innate to them. It says, in these things they corrupt themselves as brute beasts. By the way, that might be a little strong of a translation, brute beast. In the Greek, what it really says is illogical beings. Illogical beings. I kind of like the Greek word there. It's alogos. And logos, of course, is word. To put the A in front of it is to disregard it. So there's no word on here. Or logos is also where we get the term logic. Alogos. They're illogical. There's no logic to these beings, these living creatures, whether it's a beast or whatever it may be. Verse 11. Woe unto them. Would you like to know the Greek word for woe? It is woe. The Greek, it's one of these words that doesn't really have a definition. I didn't look it up in English to see if it has a definition in English, but it's more of a grunt, if you will. It's a feeling that combines a whole lot. There's a bucket of meaning into it, and yet you can't really exactly say it. So it says, "Woe unto them." And then it tells why. For they have gone in the way of Cain. This is the first reason we woe these. They've gone into the way of Cain. Again, he doesn't completely define it. I think that the way of Cain would be, all we know about Cain is, of course, he brought a sacrifice that the Lord did not accept, and his brother brought a sacrifice the Lord did accept, and Cain, rather than, can I say suck it up? Rather than suck it up and get out there and, make it right, he whined and he became bitter and he murdered his brother. So again, I think you see all the way through is these guys are not living in reality. These guys are not dealing with that which is true. These guys are failing to live responsibly, and that's what Cain did. Just try to kill the competitor, so to speak, is what Cain did. And then it says, and he ran greedily after the error of Balaam. What was the error of Balaam? Well, Balaam was the false prophet who was approached by Balak, the king, and Balaam was basically a prophet for hire. If you pay me enough money, I'll pronounce whatever curse on you. And so here's this issue here of the prophet for hire, and that's these guys. If they can get some profit out of it, whether it be financial or whatever it may be, they go after that. Or last in the verse here it says, and they perished in the gainsaying of Kor. Now Kor is actually Korah. And perished in that gainsaying there is, gainsaying is a word we don't use anymore, but it just means speaking against. And you remember Korah in the Old Testament, how he spoke against Moses and Aaron, and here's some guys who are willing to run up and speak against and go against, and he says, in the end, he says, tell you what, there's only one word for these for the destiny of these people, and that is woe. Woe unto them. I can't even put it into words, but woe unto them. Well, next week in our Bible study, we'll pick up in verse 12, and I'll lead us in a word of prayer, and then we'll be ready for our service here in just a moment.